Before you shell out the cash to buy prime lenses, check out this video because I'm gonna show you my 3 favorite prime lenses as well as how to use them. Yo, what's up my YouTube friends? Ew, that was gross. Let's keep it anyway. Okay, so here we have the 24, the 50, and the 85. These 3 lenses represent my favorite prime focal lengths, and I'm gonna tell you why and how to use them. But first, let me say this. We love these prime focal lengths, and we love prime lenses in general for several reasons. Obviously, they can shoot at very wide apertures, and that gives us a really nice bokeh aesthetic. But beyond that, they're great low light lenses. They're very sharp. We get a good high quality image out of these lenses, and it's generally at a lower price point since there's not as much moving parts and mechanics inside of these lenses. So that's all fine and great. But there's other drawbacks, namely they're not that versatile. They're rather slow when it comes to focusing speed, and this makes them not a great lens when it comes to journalism or fast moving objects or shooting sports or any type of shots like that. So for that, we have another video which I would love you guys to check out. It's the first 2 lenses that you should buy, where we talk about the 24-70 or 28-70 as well as the 7200. And then what I would say is after you get those 2, then start building your prime collection if you kind of shoot everything. If you only shoot portraits, then maybe all you care about is just having a nice prime. Let's start first with the 24 as well as the 35. Now I would class these 2 in the wide angle prime category, and between them, I'd honestly pick only one if I were you. And that choice is gonna be dependent on what other focal lengths are in your bag. For example, my new favorite lens, which I talk about in another video, is the 28-70. Because of that, I don't necessarily need a 35 at 1.8 when I have the same thing at f2. So I'd probably opt for the 24 when pairing it with this. Now, the first thing that these 2 focal lengths are gonna give you is a wide angle lens with a very shallow depth of field, and it's gonna give you a very unique look. Let's take a look at some example images. So here from this shot, this is shot 1/200 f1.4 and ISO 50. This is actually from Lighting 2, our series on SR Lounge, all about off-camera lighting. And what we can see is a beautiful depth and separation between our subject and background. We also get a very sharp image at 1.4. This again is shot at 1/200 f1.4 and a 24mm. And again, we're a little bit more pulled back with this environmental portrait, but we can still see a nice depth and separation while capturing a lot of the scene. So it makes for a really nice aesthetic and separation. Here again, we have the 35. Again, very similar in terms of its overall looks to the 24, just a slightly less wide frame, obviously. But we get this beautiful aesthetic in the background and kind of the way the leaves kind of fall in and out of focus. And same thing with this shot on the 35 as well. So the note here is that when you are shooting portraits of people, I generally will shoot them towards the center of the frame so that we were not getting any distortion, because you will get quite a bit of distortion on these lenses when you're shooting portraits. The next thing I love about them is that they're focal lengths that allow you to work in the action. So this is the 35, and I'm shooting uptight and underneath the veil, and what that does is it creates very interesting images where the viewer feels like they're right there in the action, as opposed to shooting this on, say, a 50 or an 85 or a longer focal length where it looks more like you're observing the action. So these are in the action lenses that really create a beautiful aesthetic, and still you get that background depth and everything from the lenses when you're shooting wide open. This is shot at f2, and keep in mind that once again, I'm framing my subjects closer to the center of the lens. Again, this is shot on the 24mm. We get that background, we can see everything in the shot, and I love that kind of environmental look where we're shooting close in the action, but we can still get a sense of where we are in the overall scene. Same thing here. You can see kind of the general gist. Our portraits of our subjects are very much staying towards the center of the frame, and we're showing the environment around them. We're keeping that separation to really separate them nicely from the background, but at the same time, we can see exactly what's going on in the scene. I love that aesthetic quality and what that gives you in this lens. It'll give you something that really no other prime can, that kind of feeling of being there and seeing where you are. The next thing I want to mention is that they're also fantastic for effects. So here in this shot, I'm actually using a bronze tube and holding it over the lens. I'm firing flashes through at 2 different points, one directly in the lens and one through the background to light up our subjects. And because we're shooting at a very shallow depth, these aesthetics of the kind of bokeh looks really nice and beautiful. Same thing here, we're shooting through the veil, and we actually have another video on how this image was created. So be sure to check that out because we go through everything on how we kind of pulled off this shot in camera. But again, because we're at such wide apertures, they make for great special effects lenses, as well as we get that depth and background separation, low light capabilities, and they have the width to show our background. So it's a beautiful focal length when used kind of properly, and that's how I would use them. Let's go on to the 50mm length, and this is kind of in a class of its own. And what I would say is, if you have the 35, the 50 doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense to me. If I was going with the 35, I would probably simply jump to the 85. So I have 2 lenses that vary pretty greatly in focal length. So I feel like the 50 is just a little bit too close to the 35. But if I'm going with a 24, I would probably aim for also a 50 and the 85. Okay, so the 50 is really great for, once again, we now have apertures that can open up to 1.2. You'll also have like a 1.4 option. You also have a 1.8 option. They're all great. It just depends on your overall budget. Obviously, each of the camera makers and lens makers will have their own variant of it, but they're gonna respond and behave very, very similarly. And you're not gonna necessarily see a difference between 1.2 and 1.4 and 1.8, and your clients for sure are not gonna see that difference. So pick the one that kind of best fits the budget. But starting from the top, we have a lens that's a little bit more versatile. So not only do we get that background kind of separation and depth, we can do portraits a little bit closer. We can also pull back and get some of the background. It's a really nice kind of in-between focal length that honestly used to be one of my favorite focal lengths when I first started out, and it's still one of my favorite focal lengths, but I tend to shoot more now at that 24 to kind of 35 range or on the 28-70. So here we have a nice portrait. This is shot at f1.4 and ISO 800 on the 50, and you can still see that at 1.4 we can see what's going on in the background, but we can separate him and his bride a little bit. So I can kind of blur her out a little bit, make her more of a background element piece to the shot while focusing on him. Here we have a family portrait. This is actually my kids along with Trevor Daly's kids out in Arizona, and I love this shot because it shows that at 1.4, if you back up a little bit, you can still get all of your subjects very much tack sharp on that focal plane as long as everybody's on the same plane. So when I zoom in, you'll see that everybody is sharp in the image, and you'll see a tiny bit of kind of like falling off, but it's nice. Like you can get really nice background depth and separation in these kind of scenes with the lens, and a focal length that's not too wide, because if it was 24, we would kind of see too much background. If we get too close, we're gonna distort a lot of our people in the shot. I have my kids actually out at Great Salt Lake. This is actually at the Bonneville Salt Flats. And again, the 50mm is perfect. You have to get a little bit further back shooting, but we get a lot of environment, beautiful background depth and separation, really nice shot. And we have our shot of Justin and Yvette during our maternity workshop. Again, really nice depth and separation. It's a versatile lens. It allows you to get a little bit closer, and you can see that we do have some distortion still on our subjects, but it's not terrible, it's not unusable compared to like a 24 at that same kind of range. So the next thing I'm gonna say is, for those of you that are in love with that bokeh aesthetic, the 50mm is gonna give you a very, very exaggerated bokeh aesthetic, particularly when you're shooting at like 1.2 to 1.4. So you'll just see things fall out in a very beautiful way that is only second to kind of the 85. So up close, we have this maternity shot, and even though it's fairly wide showing the environment, you can see just how nicely kind of the background follows out of focus as we go. So it's great for that as well. I will mention this, you're gonna need a little bit more room when you're working with this lens. So for example, for this shot, I'm probably like 15 feet back, and especially when you are intending for everything on that focal plane to be sharp, you do need some room and some width to work. So in tighter environments, you might find that the 50 is a little bit restricting if you wanna show a lot of the environment compared to a 35 or 24. Okay, if you are a wedding or event photojournalist, this is my favorite lens when it comes to shooting detail shots. I love the focal length. It allows me a lot of room to kind of blur out backgrounds, frame what I want in the shot, not include things that I don't want. It's just kind of like that perfect balance between everything. So when it comes to shooting details, this is the lens that I'll go to most. This last note is just to watch out for that distortion when you're shooting up close, and I'd say once you get to really that headshot range, you're gonna start seeing a bit of distortion, and it's not the ideal lens for headshots. It kind of creates a little bit of a cartooning effect compared to, like, say, an 85. So 85 is that range that we're gonna go to for that. But it's definitely a lot better than a 24 or 35 would be. Let's jump over to the 85 plus category. I'd put the 85 in this category, the 100 in this category. Anything in that range, to me, kind of has a very similar aesthetic and a very similar purpose in the way that it's used. So from the top, I'm gonna say that this level of lens is gonna yield the most kind of smushed out bokeh you can possibly imagine. This is where your background is just completely obliterated into nothing. You can't even see anything. Like, for example, this is a street with cars and signs behind them, and everything is just smushed out of focus. So if that's like the aesthetic that you're going for, then this is the focal length that you're kind of looking at. Let's show a couple more images of this. Again, this is shooting top down. Keep in mind that you really need to get pretty high up on your subjects. This is top down on an 85 at 1.2. And I want to show you this shot because you can see that the eyes to even the ears are starting to go out of focus. And you can see the blade of grass, like as it just drops down a couple inches, is really going out of focus. And this shot exaggerates that nicely. Just keep in mind that it's a little bit difficult, as we're going to talk about, when working in tight. So again, just on a neighborhood street with a house behind them, you can still create kind of beautiful images with that smushed out bokeh. And again, another kind of example of a close-up detail shot where her eyes are in focus, and you can even see how her nose is kind of going out of focus, and obviously the jewelry and everything is out of focus. But it's a very cool kind of stylistic look that you might like and appreciate. If you do, the 85 is your kind of choice of lens. So I'm gonna say this as well. This lens is fantastic when close up, okay? So working with these kind of headshots, like getting in tight, you're not gonna have distortion that you would on the other focal lengths, the wider focal lengths. So this makes it a great headshot, a great close-up lens. Another thing that I love about the 85 and longer focal lengths is the way that we can control the background through perspective compression. We can work further back and focus in on a certain element of the background that will appear closer because of that perspective in relation to the subject and background. That's what a tighter focal length gives us. Whereas if you go to the 24 and the 35, you really need to make sure that everything in the background is what you want in the camera, because you're gonna see everything in the background. So here, for example, we're shooting bottom up on our couple, and we're framing to kind of show this background as leading lines leading into them, and you don't see anything else in this scene, and there's a lot of other crap in this scene. Again, in this shot, it's literally junk behind them, but it's all compressed and out of focus. We have a tremendous amount of background compression and control in our images. Again here, this is literally a tiny area of leaves behind my kids that I really liked, and we don't need a lot of background to really make a beautiful shot. We just need a little patch to place our subjects and then to pull back a little bit and really focus in and frame appropriately. And this range of focal lengths, it gives us that control. Final example of this shot here. This shot was literally taken 2 feet away from a parking lot with a bajillion cars parked next to them, and we're just framing them under the trees and, again, controlling and framing everything else out. The main drawbacks of the 85 plus focal length is that you're not gonna get as much versatility. We're gonna need more space. In addition, your subjects generally have to be kind of holding still or moving rather slowly, especially if you're shooting wide open. These lenses just don't focus as quick as the other lenses. In addition to that space, expect to be working like 15 to 20 feet away from your subjects, especially when you want to show a good amount of background in the shots. So here, despite the fact that we see most of their bodies and a good amount of the background, we're working pretty far away from our subjects. And same thing here. But again, with shots like this, we get that background effect where the arches behind them are kind of pulled up and we can exaggerate all the people walking. But in reality, I'm shooting like 15 to 20 feet away from this couple in this shot. Okay, so in summary, the 24 and the 35. Pick one of these as your kind of beautiful wide angle in the action lens, where you can separate the subject and its background still with its wide aperture. Just remember to watch that background because you will be framing a lot of it in your shots. In addition, make sure that if you're shooting people, you're framing them towards the center of the composition to avoid distortion and don't get too close. The 50 is arguably the most versatile of these three focal lengths and will probably be one of your favorites because you can get relatively close with your portraits, you can still shoot a decent amount of background, and you have an even more exaggerated bokeh effect. Just keep in mind you're gonna need a little bit more space when working because you need to pull back a little bit when you wanna show that background. It is also my favorite lens when it comes to shooting wedding details and detailed images. Also, when shooting close-ups, just do remember that you will see a bit of distortion. So it's not the ideal headshot lens, but it's great for general portraits. The 85 Plus is gonna be the least versatile focal range when it comes to primes. This means you're gonna need plenty of space to work, but in return, at wide apertures, you're gonna get a background bokeh that really no other lens can touch. The separation is absolutely incredible. It's also a great close-up and headshot lens, and it also gives you plenty of background control with not only depth of field, but also the perspective compression that you're gonna get from working a little bit further away. That's it. Hope you all enjoyed. Be sure to like the video, comment below. You guys can see all the links to the products that we talked about in the description, as well as the images in the article. My name is Pi, and that was a lot of talking. So I'll see you guys in the next video.